All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's guest talk on making games with other people. We're happy to have joining with us again today, Bryn Davis. He's been here for the past few years talking to us about project management. And this is something we feel, based on your design docs last week, we need to make sure you kind of have some thoughts about this as you go into your design push for the next 2 weeks. Especially since one of those weeks is reading week, and that can be either a good time to get a lot of stuff done or a good time for your group members to kind of go off in their own directions and then have difficulty bringing it all back. And I know that even at this point, we've had some issues where within a group you're not sure quite what to do about like one situation versus another. Um, so Bryn's done this before. We've had these conversations, and we both know what kind of issues come up and some of the best strategies for dealing with them. So what will happen is that we'll have the main talk where Bryn will go over like a lot of what he's learned over, gosh, how many, like 2 decades of making games?
Just shy of it, yeah.
Yeah, right. And at multiple different companies, and at, sort of these like planning, like, team lead kind of level for a lot of these roles. And so between the two of us, we'll have some ideas for you, or at least hopefully expose you to some of the thoughts of what you need to think about. Those of you who've taken a software engineering course before, maybe some of this will seem like you've seen it before. But like we said early in the course, a lot of things sound obvious after you hear them. All right. So, yeah, so some of the things that you hear, I'll be like, oh, yeah, of course, right? But if we didn't think that this was an issue, we wouldn't mention it, right?
Okay.
Because if we don't mention it, people don't think about it. But when you hear it, of course, it seems obvious. All right. So just keep that in mind as you hear quote unquote obvious things over the next hour and a bit. Know that these are the things that are not obvious to people right away. And we feel like it's good to have everybody understand some of the issues you're going to be facing and the ways that you can go about addressing them. Okay. All right. So that's a long-winded intro, but Bryn, I will leave the rest to you.
Thanks very much, Steve. Yeah, hey folks. My name's Bryn Davis, lead technical level designer at Compulsion Games, and I will be talking to you today about making games with other people. First off, well, you saw my other talk, history. I'll quickly reiterate. Used to be at Lionhead Studios in the UK, where I made lots of Fable games. Then came to Canada and worked at Ubisoft Toronto for I think about 8 years with Watch Dogs 2, Legion, Starlink. About 3.5 years ago, something like that. Timeline gets confusing. I left and I joined People Can Fly and was building some cool stuff that I can't talk about as per usual. But very recently, I just joined Compulsion Games, who are working on something also very cool that I cannot talk about. So, um, I'll give you a quick preamble about this talk. As I was asked a while ago, I've been doing the level design talk for a while, and then I was asked by Steve if there was anything else I wanted to do a talk about. And there's a few things I'd like to talk about, but I picked this. And this talk was originally called, semi-hyperbolically, but I don't know if that's the case, The Greatest Challenge of Game Dev. Um, and the reason why is that I've seen like amazingly smart people and games that you can only dream of fail. And it wasn't because people weren't smart enough or the game wasn't awesome enough. It's because they failed on the principles of running a good project and operating well as a team. And I seem to be going blurry every so often. That's good. So let's get into the why. So today I want to start talking by or why you might want to make games with other people, right? Because it's entirely viable to just make games by yourself, right? And there are obviously plenty of solo devs who have been pretty successful this way. Well, one reason to go it alone is that every decision is yours. You have complete control over your own project. There's no one to disagree with. And that can mean, if you have a very specific vision of how you like your game to be, there's no one else to get in the way of that vision. But then also, it's a double-edged sword, right? Every decision is yours, right? This responsibility is all on you. And if there's specific areas that you want to focus on, then the rest of the game won't just keep moving forward. All those other parts of the game are waiting on you too. Um, and it also means then that, typically like all the tasks to actually make the game are also yours. You got to do everything, all the code, all the art, the design, the audio, you name it, it's yours. You only have so many hours in the day to do your work. You can only work on one thing at once at a time, which all means that it might take you a while to get finished. And I mean, you could say, oh, but Bryn, I'm going to hire some outsourcers to work on specific areas of the game for you. And that's true. But that comes with overhead. It's not, you don't just hire someone, you need to manage them. You need to manage their workload. You need to tell them what you want. You need to ensure that they do the thing at the time that you need it done by, etc. Outsource management is quite often a full-time job for someone. And plus, working with outsourcers is really just making games with other people with a slightly different arrangement there. So instead, most of us are making games with other people. And whether that's small teams like yours or up to huge AAA teams numbering in the hundreds or more. Making games with other people allows you to specialize on a particular job, right? And delegate other responsibilities to the rest of the team. But working with other people, that introduces its own unique challenges. And it's not just, how you organize your team's work, but it's how you bring a number of different people, right? Social, emotional human beings with varying opinions, ideas, skill sets, and personalities, and keep them working towards building the same game. So today I'm going to talk about a number of areas. Oh no, I needed to make that slightly wider, but that's fine. And hopefully I'll give you some good information to help you in your current projects, as well as your future careers. So first off, let's talk about teamwork. What does teamwork look like when making a game? When I think a good team fundamentally always needs a few things, right? First off, I know what we're doing. I know what my peers are doing. I know how much time I have. I know my peers' responsibilities. I know what I'm responsible for. And I'm empowered to make changes that I'm responsible for. And this kind of boils down to a couple of core ideas, right? When I say I know what we're doing, it's important from a high level. I know the game that we're making, right? We all know the game that we're making. Yeah, I'm doing like it's a third person survival game, but it's kind of like combining Mario Galaxy, but with like base building and some survival elements and stuff like that in there. But then also to get to the actual task to get there, like maybe I'm a character modeler, and this week I'm modeling Mario's new hat, and then I need to speak to gameplay programmer who's going to hook it up. Second, this stuff about timeframes are known, right? I need to know how much time that I have for a task so that I can scope how long I spend on it, right? How long can I spend on something? And maybe I can't spend more than a week on this hat because we need to get all of the items done by this date. And then we can also be organized to reach specific goals, right? But lastly, I need to know where responsibilities lie. What are people looking to me to be responsible for, and what do I know that I can, offload responsibility to someone else? And also, if there's things that I am responsible for, do I have the ability, am I empowered to make changes to that? Decision making is pretty crucial for any team. And so this is where leadership comes in. And now leadership might evoke the idea of a lead who has responsibility for a team of less senior developers, but it's really just someone who's responsible, empowered to make decisions. Being a leader can be tricky. On the one hand, you don't want to be a tyrant, right? Imposing your will over others with an iron fist. And environments where this happens, people can become disenfranchised with the project because they have no control over it. On the other hand, you don't just want to, try and please everyone. Designing by committee will just put the project in place where no one is truly happy with anything. The ideal is where responsibility is shared among the team members, but there's also always someone who can make a call when people don't agree. And then this is kind of where the idea of stakeholders can come in. Stakeholders are members of the team working in a particular vocation, like art, animation, audio, or such. You may not have the authority to take all decisions, but whose opinions need considering in that moment because of the effect such a decision would have on their work. The example here, I'm going to take literally any character in any game. And the last time I did this, Echoes of Wisdom had just come out, so I chose Princess Zelda from there. So we're talking about Princess Zelda today. There's a multitude of people involved in creating her and who are responsible and ultimately hold authority for specific aspects of her. I talk about 3C's design, 3C's programming, character art, animation, narrative, creative direction, audio, art direction. Is there no? Oh no, yeah. I think that's. I mean, there are more we could be going through too here, but a lot of people involved just for a single character. The design team may decide that it would be cool if Zelda could ride a horse in the game. Like this is a feature that we want to build. However, that's not only going to create more work for art, animation, and audio, but it may impact other aspects of the character. Maybe we need to ensure that her clothing doesn't clip through the horse, certain abilities are still accessible when using the horse. And likewise, animation and art may want to create a more interesting clothing setup for Zelda with secondary motion on her cape and customizable hoods and hats and such. But then this might affect her 3Cs or ability animations. It may even affect design metrics. And in both cases, teams should weigh the input of all affected stakeholders, but ultimately know where to draw the line on who has the authority to make decisions. Just a minor segue, I do love to bring up this film because it's great. You can assemble a team of expert, top of the game auteurs and yet completely fail to get anywhere. Who would have thought? Who would have thought that was capable? The film Yurovsky's Dune came out in 2013. You can probably rent it any way you like. Is a fantastic documentary covering behind the scenes of a film that never was, one which demonstrates this fact quite succinctly. There are many game dev examples of this that I'm not going to name. So it's good to keep in mind, right, that the organization and operating of a team is just as important as the abilities of the individual members. Which leads us to communication. Communicating with your team is crucial. Whether you want to make sure that everyone's in the loop, knows what to do, and above all, they feel like a part of the whole. Face-to-face communication is the absolute best. I like talking to people face to face. But a digital meeting with the cameras on can also suffice too. It's a not quite as good, but good enough. They're great for small groups or one-to-ones, and they're best for communicating something immediately, especially as it's typically harder to misinterpret someone if you can see them and you can read their body language. But they also favour individuals who are more comfortable speaking in that sort of setting. Often if you have a larger meeting, the loudest individuals are heard, whilst others don't speak up at all. Communicating dense information, especially that which you want someone to digest and mull over, is better done in some other form. You could have Slack messages, you could have a static documentation somewhere, either a Word doc or a Confluence or something like that, or email. In general, it's important to find what works within your team for different contexts, and also to develop trust between your team members by people knowing how what communication channels are open to them and that they feel heard in those. When it comes to meetings, if you're going to get together and chat about something, which in your cases might just be getting together in person, um, running a meeting requires goals and it requires someone usually actively managing it. Um, a meeting goal could be that there's something that you're trying to get by the end of it. There's something that you are trying to ensure that you understand by the end of it. And someone needs to be managing it, i.e., making sure that everyone gets heard, and collecting notes so that you know by the end of it what you're doing, what decision was made, where do you go from there. And even then, it can be difficult to get effective use out of all participants, especially if there's a large audience. The larger the audience, the kind of more that you actually need to manage it, depending on how many people you're trying to get to chime in. And one of my favorite kind of analogies here is that D&D, or basically any role-playing game, is effectively running a meeting. It's just where the goal of the meeting is to get the party to rescue the villagers from the clutches of the Troll King. For documentation, um, and there's some great guides about how to write documentation. I am a big fan of the Divio documentation system, if you want to look that up. But it's way overkill for most places. As if you're going to have a lot of documentation, you need structure to it. But let's say you write something down that you mean someone else to go and read offline. Can they find it? Do they know where to find it? Is it discoverable? Can they understand it? Is it up to date? Do they know if it's up to date or not? And then also, how critical is that information? If it's something like, stop what you're doing immediately and do this thing, then it needs to be really apparent to someone, especially if the consequences are bad that they didn't read it. And last but not least is feedback. Probably one of the most important things to get comfortable with doing, especially with working in a team, is getting used to giving constructive feedback. It's a natural part of development, and it's important for people to be able to refine their work as they go. If you don't have feedback, and you don't provide people with feedback, especially if you feel like feedback's not going to be well received, it hampers someone's ability to learn and then respond to that feedback. It's actually it's a negative thing in the long run, and so it's important to practice those loops and be constructive. Right, learn how to give and receive feedback in a way that's going to be useful. It's a skill to practice. Organisation and planning are important on any project, but more so, especially when you're dealing with more people. becomes a bigger and bigger overhead. And so let's first look at breaking down goals into tasks. Whatever you're aiming to build, having a structure to the way that you work can help in many ways. Let's say we need to plan when a feature might land. Now, first off, what's the actual player goal? So I put a player goal here, which is probably a terrible goal. It says play a character first pass. Okay. Well, first off, we all need to understand what the hell that means. What does first pass player character mean? Well, I'm thinking we need our 3Cs in working. We need the basics of like a walk and run. We need the animations represented in there. We need a camera system. Is there, a gray box character with animations? It's rigged. Physics is set up. Audio. Maybe we need VFX. Do we need VFX in this first pass? Maybe we just need hooks for them. Though that kind of level of granularity as the expectations needs to be known amongst the team. And then we can look at how we actually break that down into tasks to actually reach that goal. So, I might go, okay, well, like my 3Cs, I need to do this first pass, it's going to take a couple of days. There's some sort of, character class set up, the character art. Maybe I've got like I could even have a template character I'm just trying to fit into this. And I'm working out each of these things. And each of the stakeholders for each of these areas can give these definitions of what work would need to be done for that. There's a bunch of dependencies in here as well. Audio is going to be dependent on art and animation. 3Cs won't do much without animation. Are we doing a third-person game? We're probably going to need the character art before we can actually finalize a good framing of the camera. We can probably get something in just, first pass before then. So now that we have all of these things, let's say if you're planning on using Agile, I'm a convert to Agile, unfortunately, so you're going to hear me talk about Agile a lot, because Agile's the best. It can be. So if you're using Agile, you could plan these tasks out to take place over a sprint, length of which you can decide on and refine as you work on further sprints. Maybe it's 2 weeks, maybe it's 3 weeks, maybe it's shorter than that. What's important to have, as we lay these things out, is a clearly defined goal, which we all understand. We neatly divide that goal up into tasks for each team member and each department, right? Each task is ideally well known and can be safely estimated. And then we should know our dependencies, right? D follows C, follows B, follows A. And then at the end of the sprint, you need to be able to review all of that work and sign it off. Because, sure, we all did some stuff. We said the task was done, but did you actually achieve your goal, right? What follows from reviewing the sprint? How are we going to use that information for the next sprint that we do? Yeah, which is really looking at reviewing the sprint. When everything's done, you sit down and you can review the build with your team. Everyone can sit down, especially with your teams, they're small. You can look at the end of a period and go, here's all the stuff. You can give feedback. What would you change for the next sprint? Where do we go from here? What do you think is important to do next? And more importantly, this is super critical in my mind, if it's not in that build, it's not in the game. If someone didn't get it done in time, then it's not there, it's not represented, so it doesn't matter. You can look at it next sprint with a classic, but it works on my machine. Not good enough. Have something, just a central build that you're looking at that you can review. In production, we kind of saw, right, there are dependencies that can happen, natural dependencies where I'm waiting for someone else's work. And someone's work, therefore, might come after mine. And so understanding how your work and your decisions impact others, I think is crucial to respecting their time and their input on the game. if I come back to like a previous kind of sprint-like example, right? There's a classic dependency pattern. We have, level designers and level artists, right? The level designer, they're going to do their sort of gray box pass of the level, and they know that the sprint ends end of day on Friday. Great. Well, level art has to follow level design because otherwise we're retrofitting a design into some art that never works. So then the latest that level design can actually finish their sprint isn't Friday. They would have to finish this work by end of day Tuesday so that level art has enough time to get their stuff done by the same point. Now, these dependency patterns, there are lots of sort of classic ones in game dev. And, I predict with your teams, you probably don't have necessarily someone completely dedicated to just level design and level art. But you might have other dependency patterns here. So, if I'm supposed to be doing the lighting in a level, there's not really much point in me doing lighting if the level art hasn't been done, right? And that's a bigger kind of consideration to have, especially if you're using a baked lighting solution, because you might need to wait for a lighting bake to be done as well. Level art is, sorry, not level art, level design, as we saw in the level design talk, is very dependent on new features and code systems, right? If there's no things to go in the level, how can I build a level, right? Well, there's no gameplay to put in the level yet, then I can't really make a level. So I'm waiting on that before I can actually do my tasks. Audio and VFX quite often are dependent on other systems or animation and art and such. As I mentioned, if you've got baked lighting, that might be a dependency on that baked lighting build. But there can be other processes too, like NavMesh, having a bake. And then finally, the one team that everyone forgets is QA. And QA also needs to have their go on things. And I know that you don't have dedicated QA, but I would say you do need to leave time for QA, especially if you've got a hard deadline, because someone should test that your game works before you put it in front of someone in a situation where like they're going to grade it or something like that, or heaven forbid you taking it to level up. Someone needs to make sure everything in the game works.
Mm.
Uh, and someone,
We actually have a playtesting. We have playtesting sessions that we've arranged between the next milestone and the final one. But you're right that before the next demo after reading week, part of what should be done isn't just development, but also testing before you actually show it to us.
Yeah, exactly. Especially even with that playtest session, if that build you've taken to playtest has just like some wonky bugs or things that basically block someone from giving you proper feedback, that's really bad. Like you may be missing out on feedback you could have got just because someone didn't test the build before you took it to get feedback on. So it's good to keep in mind that sort of stuff. Now, depending on the engine and the tools that you're using, there's many different ways for you to work with other people on the same project. Technically collaborating. I realize I didn't update this slide, but you know what? It's all kind of similar. So I know a lot of you work in Unity. I haven't worked in Unity for a while, but lots of things that I'm going to mention are kind of similar anyway. Currently using Unreal 5. We use Perforce and P4V Helix and such for source control. We're using a bunch of different features that are part of Unreal 5, and there's varying different ways to collaborate there, be it using one file per actor, world partition, level instances, pack level actors. These are kind of Unreal's, or at least more recent Unreal's versions of kind of prefabs and things like that. And I know that Unity has its own sort of concepts of things like that. Typically, for say for source control, a big part here is understanding your etiquette around managing files. Whether does everyone have an impact on where files are stored, where you organize your code, where you organize your data? Or is there someone who manages it? Is there, if you want a consistent structure so you can find things? Um, Etiquette around it is making sure, who manages where things should go, and also do you keep things in checkout or not? Are things exclusive checkout? Especially a lot of data will be kind of exclusive because it might be binary and therefore you can't really merge it as easily. Naming conventions and consistency in naming things always helps to understand where things are. Do you have style guides? Do you have coding standards? Which may be going a bit far for a small team, but it can be useful, especially when you might end up having to edit someone else's code at some point. And yeah, thinking about non-manageable files there. And then structures for things, right? Are there scenes per discipline? Are there sub-levels? Are there, how do you organize content in ways that kind of helps people be able to collaborate easily? It's useful for being able to separate kind of areas of concern for different disciplines. But, often though, there's no real typical enforcement of how data is used and how those things are used. So you have to make a decision about how deep you want to go down the rabbit hole for things. The flip side to being super organized and having a bunch of rules is that they become, well, either one person cares about them and no one else does, and therefore they're not enforced. Or secondly, if they are enforced, are they too restrictive? Is it too much? Does it provide too much overhead for someone else to manage? Because it's all work. Someone would need to do that. But then, how do professional game developers collaborate? Right? What's some of the kind of the industry standards? What do we use for software? Well, I mentioned some things there, but there's a lot of software used. Would you believe? A huge, huge amount of software used across all different types. And this is not an exhaustive list. If I look at art and animation, you could look at all the Autodesk suite, obviously Substance and things like that. ZBrush is, still very much used in lots of places. But also Blender is a lot more common now, especially at studios, maybe like smaller studios or studios that are newer that are looking to kind of cut down the spend on so much of Autodesk area there. Obviously, Houdini is very popular for doing kind of procedural work or VFX or things like that. You also have audio. Lots of people use Wise. There are obviously other things other than Wise, but I haven't noted them down here. Code, obviously Visual Studio, but Rider is increasingly taken up across the industry as well. Lots of people, especially working with Unreal, Rider can be pretty good, in some ways better than Visual Studio when working with Unreal. Design, you pick your poison of is it Microsoft or is it Google? Also, okay, I haven't found a lot of places that actually use like LibreOffice, but hey, I'm using LibreOffice right now, and I would do that, for free versions of things is pretty good without having to use Google Suite in there. Production, lots of people use Jira, obviously. You use Microsoft Project. There's a ton of other things in here that are more specialized. Uh, but I mean, even outside of specific software for specific kind of job families, communication. Plenty of people use Google Meet, Slack, Miro, Discord, source control, as we mentioned before, not just P4V, but Alien Brain as well. has been fairly popular. And to be honest, I could keep going of the infinite amounts of things that people could be using. So let's talk about positive work environments. And there's one thing I wanted to mention before we get into this, because the subject of thinking about how to foster positive working environments could quite easily drift into things like toxic workplace behavior and harassment. We're not going to talk about those specifically because this isn't something that someone requests you not to do. At least everyone has a right to work in an environment free from harassment. So it is not something that's going to be asked of you. That's just the law. Um, so respecting others' expertise. One of my favorite things, I think the most amazing thing about the games industry is how such a varied group of disciplines come together to make a game. But to ensure that you have a good relationship with your team, you need respect and you need empathy. Now I come back to this chaos of logos and things like that. You think about the varying different people on your team, different roles and things like that. Everyone has a different domain knowledge. What could be, a range of software or languages that they use. There could be specific libraries. There might be internal tools or processes that that's their wheelhouse. Um, Even within programming, there are specific programming specialties. It could be an AI programmer, an engine programmer, a 3D rendering programmer. And one facet to this is finding a way in which you can communicate between each other. Like, how can someone who doesn't use that software or doesn't know that library um, understand what I need them to understand? Uh, it, how in my role, let's say I sit between programmers and content creators, and a lot of the time I need to pass information both ways. I understand both roles very well, but both of those roles quite often don't understand each other because they do very different work. And so this becomes an important thing of breaking down these barriers to be able to enable better communication between them. Um, there's another aspect to this as well, which is simply respecting what someone knows best. You kind of have to give someone the benefit of the doubt there that, like, I mean, you're an AI programmer, you've been doing this 25 years. I think you know what you're talking about when it comes to this stuff. But it's exciting, right? Working with a huge range of experts across different sorts of fields is exciting. And I think it's probably the best thing of working in the games industry. So the best approach to take with this, with anyone that you work with here, is to take the role of always be learning and be humble with people. You can't go wrong. Check your biases. So, within any social environment, you'll gravitate towards people that you like, right? And that you get on with and you'll make friends and such. If you're at work, if you're working in a studio, you're working on a project with a team, um, you're at work as well. And so it's important to check yourself to ensure that you don't invariably allow your social relationships to impact your work responsibilities. And favoritism is the kind of typical way this might go. Um, if I some of my previous work that I'd done when I was working at Ubisoft, a lot of that was support work. I would teach the content teams how to use tools. I'd solve issues for them. I kind of represent their needs within various different tech disciplines. And, it's important, it's my job that I support all the world team equally, or all those content teams equally, even if there's people that I get on with more socially than others. There are plenty of people on the team who shy, maybe they're just not especially social at work. Language can be an immediate barrier as well. A lot of people, English wasn't their first language. And so there can be all of these barriers to you interacting and communicating with someone. And ideally, it's my job. I should be able to give equal time and attention to everyone, right? So you have to try and aim to avoid having your social relationships affect decision making when it comes to, actually doing your job and being responsible whilst you're at work. Um, and obviously, being new in the industry, oh, my notes are on here. Um, so typically, there are patterns often that I see with people who have come fresh into the industry. It's their first role in the sort of the greater games industry. They're new into a company and a team, and there are certain challenges that typically come up. I wanted to try and go over here. Um, the first one being to pick your battles. There's a multitude of way in which different developers will butt heads. Not only design decisions, but technical implementations. How we want different pieces of the game to interact with each other. Um, and so knowing what decisions you feel strongly about and are important to you and which are less important is critical, because those decisions that are not crucial for you give space to someone else to leave their mark. This is a very common issue I see, particularly with more junior staff on the design side, because naturally someone comes into games industry, they're full of passion, they want to leave their mark, they want to, put, their sort of put their design forward. But often it can be a struggle to kind of nail a focus as to what they actually need. Um, I typically kind of run through us and say, well, ask yourself, what is crucial to my work, right? What can I be flexible with? Try and kind of preempt what is likely important to another team member. And preempting this can help you anticipate giving space to your other teammates and avoid having to butt heads unnecessarily. There are no stupid questions. It is incredibly important for any team to foster a culture whereby people can feel free to ask questions without feeling stupid. Uh, Man, this just ages me whenever I ask this. So when I started in the industry, almost 20 years ago, I didn't know what a normal map was. I mean, okay, right, they were pretty new at that point, but I was like, what's that weird, like, psychedelic texture there? I knew about bump mapping and height maps and stuff. That was kind of quite commonplace at the time, but height maps, I had no idea what that was. Um, and of course, that's okay. You don't know what you don't know. And so, kind of being in a space where I could ask and find out and kind of learn was good. And people didn't necessarily make it seem like it was stupid for me to ask that question to find out about this thing. As we kind of saw in the previous question, there's a very broad range of specific domain knowledge. That means that other people on the team are likely to have very different scopes of knowledge. Like not knowing about certain rendering techniques or whatever. Uh, but more than that, right? Different studios and teams have a different sense of normal. And this can be something that's alien to everyone else. There's actually kind of, there are slowly things being standardized in the games industry, but it's really not as standardized as you'd think. And often teams can do things that are very different from each other. quite often asking a question about something can actually highlight something that's missing or incomplete or just wrong, right? And so fostering a kind of an environment where people feel like they can talk about things, they can raise a question that they think everyone else must have seen this, is really valuable. Um, my favorite example of this, I I remembered, what was it? It was towards the end of Fable 3's development. We were kind of in the final stretch, so to speak, and the tools team had got some time. They were going to be able to support content creators, and they were like, right, what's some like low hanging fruit that would really help you guys close the game out? And we all racked our brains and kind of, wrote down some suggestions. And we had a brand new level designer on the team, and he only just joined. So he was like, guys, have you realized that every single time you select anything in the editor, the default width of the window that shows you all the information about the stuff is never wide enough. And every single time, every single person just drags it wider. And none of us knew because all of us had become completely blind to it because we'd been using it for years. So it was just muscle memory at this point. But that's something that probably took a couple of seconds for every single operation you ever did in the editor. And all I had to do was just make it slightly bigger. It's probably the lowest hanging fruit. But yeah, we were blind to it. And it kind of felt stupid mentioning it, but he was completely right. So having that sort of a culture where people feel comfortable about bringing stuff like that up without feeling like they're being stupid is really important because you might catch things like that, which kind of mixes a little bit with this next one, which is everybody makes mistakes. Um, you kind of need to normalize people making mistakes. Obviously, the goal is to avoid mistakes, avoid problems and things, right? Be there issues that were missed early on that caused problems later on in development. Maybe someone checks something in and it breaks everything. You've caused a crash or whatever. Um, of course, you don't want those things normally, but mistakes happen. And so making the taking the sting out of like someone having made a mistake will help in future. You know, the most important thing on a project when a mistake has been made is to highlight it to the team, right? But immediately, this relies on a team culture that makes it easy to do so. No one wants to feel like they did something really bad and they're putting their hand up and say, I messed up, right? It's a bad feeling, especially if you might have messed up and now suddenly hundreds of other people are affected. It can feel difficult to do. But then that leads to us thinking, well, if I'm not that person, then we should help foster a culture by which it's kind of judgment free. You want to ensure that people feel comfortable coming forward when they've done something like that. So that actually puts the emphasis on everyone to create that culture. When we consider build breakages, as I mentioned actually before this talk, often they are, a failure of process. Like we design pipelines usually to mitigate errors, and we should be able to shield the project's build pipelines from such issues. Um, and we get into deeper things here, like why did the error happen? Why did this thing happen? Why did you create this mistake? Is it indicative of something deeper? Sometimes it could be you did this change, you didn't test it, it caused this problem. It may be you couldn't test this issue. That's really bad. How could you not test this issue? Was there no way around this? Well, then that could be a deficiency in tools or a deficiency in our processes that couldn't be tested. Um, this, you know, things being not testable in game can be very problematic. And so, you know, these issues coming forward can highlight this. And then other cases I mentioned previously, you could have a compound error where, you know, multiple things all aligned all at once. No one could have foreseen this happen. And again, then you can think about, well, how do we mitigate that in future? And how can we respond to that in a better way? Oh, which is what I just mentioned there. But that is it for this talk. Does
Okay.
anyone have any questions?
Thanks, Bryn. I'm actually going to stop the recording so that people
Mm.
can ask questions in a safe way. Um, but for the purpose of the recording, I just wanted to say thanks for sharing this and giving us a starting point for us to discuss some of the more specific issues that we have with our groups going into our first development push. So yes, thank you, Bryn, for coming to join us and for sharing your perspective over the past few experiences you've had in the industry.
No, no worries. Thanks very much for having us.
All right.